This is a commentary on Plato's Timaeus, recorded July 18th, 2024. The introductory conversation Socrates has on the previous day described an ideal city, like that outlined in Plato's Republic. He would like an account of his citizens in action, which he calls on the others to provide. Socrates: 1, 2, 3, but where, my dear Timaeus, is the fourth of my guests of yesterday who were to entertain me today? Now, right off the bat, what we've got is numbers, three numbers, and this is something relating to a idea that I encountered when trying to read Carl Jung, Psychology and Alchemy, where he talks about something called the axiom of Maria, who is Maria the Jewess or Maria the prophetess, and there's some sort of thing about I'm not going to try to recount it by memory, but there's obviously some relation between that idea and the what Socrates is talking about to start the Timaeus off with. And this is a theme, if you pay attention. I have noticed this theme in Neon Genesis Evangelion. If you have not seen it, it's about adolescent children who pilot giant robots, and after there's a pivotal plot moment where for most of the series, there are three children and three giant robots, and then they're going to introduce the fourth child and the fourth giant robot. But there is a crisis, and the giant robot loses control and turns against the other as soon as it is introduced, right? So this is kind of like you've established these three things, but the fourth is missing so Timaeus says he's full of the sick, Socrates, otherwise he would never willingly have missed today's discussion. First of all, there's obviously Neon Genesis Evangelion is relating to the Timaeus and Carl Jung. There's obvious connections there, and popularity amongst people who are into Jung in that particular show, I've noticed. As well as obviously, Jung is not really reinventing the wheel. He's just talking about Plato and all that kind of stuff, right? Anyways, Socrates then says, then if he's away, it is up to you and the others here to fulfill his part as well as your own. So the missing fourth, and then it's up to fill in the blanks for the missing fourth. Yes, we'll certainly do our best, for it wouldn't be just after the faultless hospitality that you showed your guests yesterday, if the rest of us were not eager to entertain you in return. Do you remember, then, the subjects I set you and their scope? Some of them, and you are here to remind us of any we have forgotten. Better still, it's not too much trouble. Give us a brief summary of the discussion to fortify our memory. I will. Yesterday, my main object, I suppose, was to describe my view of the best constitution and its citizens. And we all very much like the city. I don't know if I should read the names. I'm just reading them without the names. It's Timaeus and Socrates talking to each other. And we are all very much liked the city which you described, Socrates. Socrates: we began, do we not, by separating the class of farmers and the other crafts from that of the defense forces? Yes. So, this, I thought I'd start doing this because certain things coming up relating to the idea that, first of all, apparently if you look at what is called the New Age, or New Age spirituality in general today. The claim has been made that the New Age, at its core, is basically just Platonism. That the New Agers are basically just trying to go to Plato and see like sacred geometry everywhere. They're really into. There's a certain kind of New Ager that gets obsessed with like the perfect forms and the archetypes and the triangles and all this kind of stuff, right? And so at its core, as core New Age spirituality is basically just going back to Plato. However, there's this issue that comes up about the oneness, the sort of like the unity consciousness that people would talk about, right? And the problem of division, right? Of a divided society. Now, the thing is, you got to look at, if we do a close read of what Plato is actually talking about, in the first page here, we've got separating the class of farmers and the other class from that of the defense forces. So you've already got a division in your society created by the separation of agricultural workers and defense forces or the military, right? And so I don't know if maybe it's just stereotypes talking about the New Ages, but the New Ages are always talking about the approaching the problem of the, this is the question, like there's a unity that's there, that is already there, that does not, you don't have to do anything to make anything more united, right? But there's the idea, if you look at people who are like, oh, there's so much polarization in the let's say political landscape, right? There often, this sort of the divide we usually see is between urban and rural populations, where rural populations typically vote more right wing, and urban centers typically vote more left wing, and it's kind of like almost kind of automatic. Maybe in that way, that there's just, it's like one of the interesting things is that, similar to the way that the Socrates is making this distinction between the military and the agriculture and making a class separation or whatever, there's a idea that the city, the agriculture is not something that's fundamentally opposed or polarized against the city. It's rather that the cities have agriculture surrounding them as a way to have their fuel the people that work in the city. You'll have a lot of people. There's also, of course, export markets and things like that. But the main there's not that cities and agriculture are necessarily opposed or polarized, but there's a division is made between different kinds of land use, right? You have urban land use to industrial land use, agricultural land use, and so from that also the division of labor, right? So, and this the kind of idea is that prior to agriculture, man was just undivided. He was just out there hunting and fishing in the wild. He was just an animal amongst other animals, or trying to just be. There wasn't this sort of like a systematic distinction. I mean, I'm not necessarily making an argument for that being better, but I'm just contrasting you've got the agriculture. Although there is a certain kind of neo-primitivist or primitive. People who would prefer to go back to a pre-agriculture society, and seeing that military is something that necessarily goes with an agriculture society, because the military because you separate a bunch of people focusing their energy on production of food, and then you've got other people focusing their energy on defense, basically, right? Or perhaps even offense. And with that separation and that specialization, you've got a split where the military are obviously exposed to a different quality of different circumstances, which may be more violent or bloody or aggressive, and then the people that are if you're just making like milk and cheese and or I mean you may have to kill some chickens or something like that as an agricultural worker, but there's the is maybe you're exposed to a different kind of life, and so you're not seeing the total picture of everything going on, and then from this you've got an immediate kind of division where you've got people having identities based on identifying with the role they play in the society, and then maybe judging the other people for whatever reason, or having different political interests that are divided against each other because of what may be in the interests of there may be certain rifts or conflicts, or certain demands that need to be balanced against different people who are divided into different roles or classes in society, and it's also set up predominantly that since the military has the power, right? There's a certain power structure that the military has over the agriculture, in that you don't want them to just like get angry and kill you and take your food or your appropriate your means of production or whatever, right? Anyways, continuing on. Timaeus says, yes, Socrates says, and we assign to each class as being natural to it a single appropriate occupation or craft. So those whose duty it was to fight on behalf of all would be the city's sole guards against the threat of harm, whether external or internal. They would be gentle in administering justice to their subjects, who were their natural friends, and tough in fighting battles against external enemies. Right? And this is kind of interesting to read in the current political climate, because there's obviously a certain problem where being tough on, like, or being the inner divisions in society, the military and the police force, and being tough on your own population, and the America in specific having a huge there's more. I don't have to get into the numbers about how many people in prison are Americans versus other populations, and the idea of, are you at war with external enemies, or are you at war with your own population, right? And at least, if Socrates is a bit, this is also ancient Greece, so I imagine there's a lot of war and whatnot. I still have to read the Iliad, but the whole idea was that Greece came out of a whole bunch of people fighting with each other, and so there was a certain necessity placed on having a strong military that seems to color this. But he's saying that it's good to be tough on your enemies, but you should be friends with the people that are in your own country and not fight with them, right? And to ensure the appropriate gentleness and toughness in their behavior to each, we said, I think that the nature of the guard's soul must combine the spirited and the philosophical to a rare degree. Yes. So these people are going to you need to balance temper, basically, your aggressive or tough temperament with a philosophical outlook and a certain gentleness or kindness or softness, and you have to mix those two together to the right degree, because if you don't want to have the one class being all gentle and one class being all tough, right? And that tends to be the cliche that is associated with the bourgeois being kind of this Gentile class, or there's a certain class of people. What's come part of the polarization that I've noticed is that there seems to be a certain kind of politics, mainly a kind of a liberal centrist politics, where people, for example, in the Donald Trump recent stuff that's happened around Donald Trump assassination attempt, there's certain people being canceled, or basically you could say, for saying things like they're upset that that the shooter missed or something, right? And then the liberal there's a certain kind of like gentleness that would be like, how could you even ever say something like that, even about your enemy? Because even, as, of course, from a Christian perspective, Jesus Christ said to love your enemies, and from the Buddhist perspective, they would never want to, harbor hateful thoughts or hateful energies or wish any negativity on anybody. But there's a certain, if you keep pushing in that direction, there's a kind of a gentleness there that is, if you have a huge military defense force, basically you have a bunch of people who have this like, we would never, it was unthinkable to suggest that anybody would want anybody to die ever. But meanwhile, at the same time, how much money are you putting into the military, and how many, how much the arms industry, and like there's so much invested into that, and yet there's this kind of imbalanced gentleness, which you can't, where people, to suggest that anybody would think anything else other than having the bet, you're and they're politicians, of course, right? But you have like, there's a certain gentleness that goes with the kind of liberal political correctness, and then that's often contrasted by these people who just, they don't really have anything to say, but they just like to, they want to remind people that they're not gentle, they're tough, right? That they're gonna put up these like big skeletons with waving the middle finger, or they want to just like project a tough image as a contrast, and I think there's a kind of duality there. And what Socrates is saying here is that we need to create a blend, or temper these two forces together, so that they don't get too extreme. They don't get too there's a certain separation that is necessary by having a specialized military force or a specialized police force, but you don't want to have. I think that might be one of the problems with the whole "all cops are bastards" thing, is that there's a kind of a weird kind of split or separation where people identify with what they do and identify with what they don't do. There's a certain tendency to avoid the identifying with the cop or the authority or the military or all that kind of stuff, and as such, if you're a gentle person who would never be violent, or versus a person who is overly identified as being a tough guy, Socrates says either extreme is no good. Especially for the people but he's saying specifically in this context, especially for the people who are the military and the police, that if the military and the police forget their gentleness, forget their softness, forget their philosophical approach, the value of doing everything that you do with a philosophical, reflective quality, rather than just being a brute mechanism of control and power, you're in trouble, right? So this is actually pretty good, I think, so far. But I'm not letting Socrates off the hook yet. He continues to say, as for their innate nurture, they were to be trained in physical exercise, the arts, and in all the studies appropriate to them. Of course, having been so brought up, they must never, I think we said, regard gold or silver or anything else as their own private property, but earn a wage like mercenaries, sufficient for their moderate needs, in return for the safeguard they afforded to those under their protection. They were to share all expenditure and live a common life together, devoting their attention wholly to excellence, freed from all other preoccupations. So, does that sound like the world we're living in now? No, I don't think so. Because I think a lot of what this is for is putting the... because this, if you take this whole thing about private property to be the fundamental thing of what defines a person as being a communist versus a capitalist. If a capitalist is all about private property and a communist is not about private property, in this reading, Socrates sounds like a communist, because he says that the military or the police force are not to be doing any of this stuff for money, Whereas in this, now what we have is we have a private contracting. You have military contractors, or you have people in arms trade, where if there's no, they'll just start a war for the sake of making money to sell guns to people, right? Or there's certain conflicts of interest where Dick Cheney, and what was it, were those companies that Dick Cheney had that made all that money off of the war in Iraq? So there's obviously a financial incentive to the business of defense or offense, as the case may be. But you're not just earning a modest wage sufficient for moderate needs in return for the safeguard they afforded to those under their protection. It's not really like that, right? So in some way, I think I'm doing this mainly because I was criticizing, because there's certain hawkishness I felt to Socrates. But this is actually a lot better than the way things are with the United States right now, or how it has been. um, that was what we said. And we had something to say about the women, too. Their natures were molded similarly to the men, and they were all to share the same occupations both in war and in the rest of life. So what is interesting is that Socrates is talking about a conscious molding of the character of women, but to say that we also need women on the battlefield, which is, some would say that is maybe the inclusion, because I was just watching Game of Thrones last night, and you had some, female dragon riders and all that. Maybe that whole idea of the female military commanders or, riders of the dragon in a fantasy setting is actually not too far away from the whatever Socrates had in mind for his ideal society, that women would also be involved in the military. It's not actually that, it's not even that progressive. People were talking about this 2,000 years ago, right? This is the old stuff, right? We just haven't we haven't progressed that much. And Timaeus said we said that too, right? So it was a popular idea back then, apparently, amongst the Greeks. I expect you to remember that what was said about the production of children, because it was unusual. We laid it down that marriages and children should be shared in common by all, and that arranged that no one should recognize any child born as their own, but that all should regard themselves as related to everyone else, which is an interesting idea. What does it mean that in a society where you're not recognizing the nuclear family bonds, but rather all children are the children of everybody in the society, versus the way that we live now? That is a very stark contrast to the way things seem to be organized now. The much more collective attitude in ancient Greece, or what Socrates is just basically putting forward what he thought his ideal was. So this may not be what is actually going on in Greece, but this is what Socrates is trying to say the ideal society we should aim for would be like, right? He's summarizing the Republic, which by the way, I've listened to a bit of the Republic on audio tape, but I have not done the whole Republic yet. We're going for they're given the cliff notes in the beginning of Timaeus here. So all those born within the appropriate period would regard each other as brothers and sisters, anyone born earlier than themselves as parents and grandparents, and anyone born later than themselves as children and grandchildren. So everybody's one big family in Socrates' ideal republic. So the provisions you describe are easy to remember. And to ensure that their natures should from the start be the best possible, you will remember that we said that the male and female rulers should secretly arrange the lot so that bad and good men are separated and allocated for mating to women like themselves, and prevent any possible consequent ill feeling by letting it be supposed that the allocation was due to chance. This is funny because we're talking about what the New Agers are like when they're talking about the the polarizations and the separations in society. And I was already talking about the division between agriculture and the military, and the division between a kind of a Gentile class, and the division between or what you see between the Marxists talk about the bourgeois and the proletariat. And the proletariat are typically, there's association between these kind of like hardworking people that are not afraid to show you how tough they are, that are not, they don't care if they hurt your feelings or something like that, because for them it's all about getting the job done. And these kind of a effeminate bourgeois kind of Gentile class, but that physically that the military and the police force are not supposed to get out of touch with the philosophical or gentleness, right? And now we're talking about the men and women and marriage, but there's a separation of classes where good men marry good women and bad men marry bad women. But they're saying that they are secretly arranging things so that people are separated and allocated. So there's a secret form of control, making sure that bad people only marry other bad people and good people only marry other good people. But you want to prevent possible ill feeling. Socrates is acknowledging that if people found out about this, they'd probably be pissed off. So they need to cover this up and give people the impression that it'll happen by random. It's just a random occurrence. You met this person and you guys hit it off or didn't hit it off just out of chance, not because we've engineered this thing, because people have a sort of a classist thing that you're out of their. This is basically, I think Socrates here is describing the idea of having different leagues, right? That a person being out of your league and it being something that they need to develop this system, so that you have gradations where you have this underclass and an elite overclass, and that you don't want these two mixing. And this is basically similar to like a caste system, like they would have in India, right? The most extreme form would be like a class of untouchables who are, if you're just born into that class, you don't have any hope of ever getting out of your position in life. You're just stuck there, right? Now, keep in mind, this is 2,000 years ago. So, but it's still, I don't know. This is certain things that starting to get into things that I would take issue with. Anyways, Timaeus, I remember. You will remember too that we said that the children of good were to be brought up and cared for, and those of bad distributed secretly among the rest of the community. The children of good were to be brought up and cared for, and those of bad were to be distributed secretly among the rest of the community. And the rulers were to keep a constant eye on the children as they grew up, and to promote in turn any who deserved it, and degrade into the places of the promoted any in their own ranks who seemed unworthy of their position. So the idea is that, as we laid out earlier, that the thing is that the children are not... There's a less of a sense of children being stuck in their family of biological heritage, of less of a rigid nuclear family, but rather you've got bad men and bad women mating together, producing bad children. But the idea is that we don't want to have this. If this is really how it works, and you've just got the ne'er-do-wells and delinquents of society breeding together, creating... You don't want to be like Hitler and just try to like eliminate these people through kind of like cleansing these degenerate wastes in society. What Socrates is saying is that we need to like somehow distribute the children that come from bad families. Take the kids from bad families and put them in good families, right? And you just have to like take the kids and mix them, spread them out, pepper them through society, and that maybe that some of these kids from bad families will be able to better themselves and rise up in the ranks, and then the other people can go fall down the ranks, and then by your kind of meritocracy, you have some at least chance for social mobility in this arrangement, which is not so bad, I guess. Although it is kind of odd if you think, though, what would happen if you had parents who were in a family that was considered to be a bunch of ne'er-do-well delinquents, and it would be like kind of like being seized by social services or something, right? But instead of being put in like an orphan home or something, you're going to be seized by social services and taken away to live with the elites or the privileged class, because that would be a distributing you would be, rather than having concentrations of delinquent despondency, you'd even it out throughout society, and it seems implied to me that what they're suggesting is it would at least create the opportunity through social mobility. Although, what would the people think, though, about being separated from their families? Then there's a whole question about, residential schools here in Canada, and how the natives were separated from their families and stuff like that. And is this not a kind of a precursor to that kind of thinking, right? The idea that rather than maintaining the biological heritage of the natural family in Socrates' world, we don't have any respect for that at all. Everybody is family with everybody else, and if the best thing to do is for the kids with a shitty family to have the opportunity to have different parents, right? Socrates basically does not have any high regard for the idea of keeping that that really strict, rigid way of looking what a family is as being, in his society, is a completely different, is a radically different approach. But there's also strange, because the sense of control. There's a constant eye kept on the children by the rulers of society. How much? Like, do you think? Can you imagine that? Like, one of the problems too is that we've got 8 million people on the planet Earth today. I don't know how many people were alive in ancient Greece, but to think that the ruler of the society's job is to like keep an eye on all the children, like, it just seems impractical. It also seems a little bit paranoid that you're a child growing up, always being watched by Big Brother, the watchful eye of the ruler, but they're at least they're there to give you a promotion if you deserve it. It's meritocracy. If you do good, you deserve to be rewarded for doing good, basically, right? That rather than no good deed will go unpunished, they're trying to actually reward good deeds, and to not have people feel like people are stuck in their circumstances unnecessarily, right? So there's an underlying sense of social mobility in Socrates' vision, I would say. Is that an adequate summary of yesterday's discussion, my dear Timaeus, or has anything been left out that we miss? There's nothing, Socrates. These were the things that were said. Let me go on to tell you how I feel about the constitution we have described. My feelings are rather like those of a man who has somewhere seen some splendid animals, either in a picture or are really alive but motionless, and wants to see them moving and competing for prizes in an activity which seems appropriate to their physiques. That's exactly what I feel about the city we have described. I would be glad to hear someone give an account of it fighting with other cities in the contests in which cities compete, entering a war in an appropriate way, and showing in the fighting all the qualities one would expect of its systems of education and training, both in deeds, through its actions, and in words, by its negotiations with its rivals. Now, this is kind of what I kind of take issue with here, is that why is it that, isn't it kind of weird that, like, okay, so this idea that you have seen some kind of animals that you admire. What great animals? Like, what if you're in the wild and you saw, like, a cougar or a wolf, and it just impressed you, and you're like, you know what? I'm so impressed with the majesty and the beauty of this animal. I just want to see it fighting some other animals. I want to see like a crazy animal fight with these things snarling and biting each other and seeing which one kills the other one. Like, wouldn't that be great? You know what? This is what I think is like slightly a bit perverse. It's like, if you have such love and admiration for these things, like why is your first reaction, I want to see this thing fight another thing, right? Like, because normally if you see like it just doesn't make sense to me, right? Or that it could also be that in the context that we live today, there's a certain, people don't want to see, like, people want peace, they don't want war. And this is what I'm talking about, saying hawkishness. That Socrates has laid out this plan for society, and now he just wants war. Let's just see these people fight each other, right? Like, and it's like, why? Because he wants excellence, he wants greatness, and that the ones that win will be great. They'll be the winners. And this is why don't I don't see people talk. This is why I said I had a criticism of Socrates, but it's mixed though, because like maybe there's some good stuff in here, but I don't know. I will finish reading. There's one more page to go. We'll see what it says. Now, my dear Critias and Hermocrates, my own verdict on myself is that I shall never be able to praise the men and the city sufficiently. This, as far as I am concerned, is not surprising, but in my opinion, the same is true of the poets, past and present. Not that I have a low opinion of the tribe of poets, but it is clear to all that the imitative people imitate best and most easily what they were brought up with, while what lies outside that experience is difficult to imitate, well in deeds and even more so in words. The tribe of sophists, again, I have always thought to be experienced at making many and beautiful speeches on other subjects, but I'm afraid that because they wander from city to city and never manage a home of their own, they may fail to hit upon the sort of things that men who are at once philosophers and statesmen would do and say in war and in battles when they engage with enemies in action or in verbal conversation. There remains the tribe which is of your disposition, who is by nature and upbringing imbued with philosophy and statesmanship. For Timaeus here comes from the well-ordered city of Locris in Italy, where he is second to none in wealth and birth. There he has enjoyed the highest offices and distinctions the city can offer, and has also, in my opinion, reached the highest eminence in every kind of philosophy. Critias, I suppose, all of us here know to be no amateur in these matters, while there are many witnesses to assure us that Hermocrates is qualified in them also, both by natural gifts and by his education. I had this in mind yesterday when I agreed to readily to your request for an account of the Constitution. I knew that there was no one more fitted to provide the sequel to it than you. If you were willing, you are the only living people who could adequately describe my city fighting a war worthy of her. So, when I had done what was asked of me, I set you the task I have just described. You agreed to put your heads together and return today my hospitality by way of speeches, and here I am, dressed in my best, and looking forward to what I am about to receive. So that is Socrates setting up the sequel to the Republic, the Timaeus, in which Critias and Timaeus are gonna. He's giving these guys the job of following it up. But we're not gonna get into that now because I've talked enough. Thanks for listening.